that this motion be agreed to. Amendment, Lord Moyler.
My Lords, as the noble Lord the Minister has explained, this is a very narrow and technical instrument, but it has some very interesting and indeed rather sinister ramifications. If we start with the first interesting ramification, we could talk at least briefly about the state of the roads. There's a great deal of complaint about potholes in the road. I would go a little bit further. I'd suggest that there are many roads in this country now which not merely have potholes in them, but where the base of the road, the underlying structure of the road, is now seriously damaged and has not been properly maintained. And it's true that this was not looked after well by the previous government, but it has got worse under the current government. I was in Oxfordshire at the weekend. I drove along one road in the country that was so in such an appalling condition, it was more reminiscent. It was reminiscent of the sort of travel writing one read in the 19th century of enterprising journeys into Calabria and strange and unexplored parts of Europe at the time. It was virtually on the grounds, virtually about to break up completely. Our roads are falling to pieces and the government is doing nothing about it. Why is that relevant to this instrument? I can hear noble lords asking that question, gasping, in fact, in exasperation to try to know the answer. Why is it relevant? The relevance is that the principal reason why roads are breaking up in this country is to do with the weight of vehicles, not the occasional juggernaut that passes down an Oxfordshire lane, but the relentless beating they take from heavier and heavier vehicles. Now, part of that, of course, is due to the fashion for SUVs, which I personally depreciate and can't entirely understand. But a great deal of the rest of it is to do with the fact that electric vehicles are, as the Minister has said, notably heavier than petrol vehicles. And that is what is breaking up our roads. And this government is doing nothing at all about it. And it is getting worse. They said they would be better than the last government. They are not making those improvements. And that brings us to the instrument, because what the instrument does is to try and make it easier for vehicles to be heavier, if I can put it that way. It removes certain restrictions that have been placed on the driving of electric vehicles in particular, that are heavier electric vehicles. It removes those restrictions. Now, I think we should start from the point that the purpose of putting conditions on driving licenses, which we've done for many, many decades, since they started almost, is to achieve road safety. And that's why we have different licenses matching different sorts of vehicles. But what we're here see, and these conditions that the Minister is removing today were put in place for safety reasons. And the government is making the case that they're no longer required for safety reasons. And the official opposition accepts that. So to the extent that these restrictions are being removed, we have no objection to it on safety grounds. The government has made that case. But they're being removed solely for electric vehicles. And I think it's very important to draw two conclusions from this. The first is that the government is sending, whatever the noble Lord the Minister says, a very powerful signal to those people trying to develop synthetic and alternative fuels, where the limits are not being reduced, the conditions are not being removed, that they don't matter, that the government has taken its choice, it's made its option, it's going to back electric, it's not backing the alternatives. That's the first message, and it's not a good message. It was, as the noble Lord says, aired in the other place. The second, which was not, I think, aired in the other place, but is an important point, is that the government is doing this, and I refer here to the explanatory memorandum attached to the instrument. And if I may quote from it briefly, I quote from paragraph 5.6. It says, although alternatively fuelled vehicles produce less CO2 emissions than petrol and diesel vehicles, alternatively fuelled vehicles still produce CO2 emissions at the tailpipe. Consequently, these vehicles would not meet the government's objective for all new cars and vans to be zero emission at the tailpipe by 2035. My Lords, this is, I think, the first time, and this is what is sinister, this is the first time that conditions are being attached to driving licences, not for the purpose of road safety, not to match skill to the type of vehicle that is being driven, but rather to achieve a government net zero policy. And in principle, it opens the door to other measures in the future where driving licenses are restricted so as to match government policy on net zero. And that those people, many of them on lower incomes, who are dependent on internal combustion engines and will probably never be able to afford an electric vehicle as things currently stand, will find themselves squeezed out of the possibility of driving them as more and more restrictions are placed on their driving licence. This would be a genuinely sinister and worrying trend, and I think the government should be ashamed, quite frankly, of paragraph 5.6 in the explanatory memorandum, and it should repudiate it. Finally, of course, a driving licence is no use whatsoever if you can't get a driving test, and that is another point that arises from this. It is true again that the government inherited a situation where there was a large backlog of driving licence bookings. People couldn't get through. But that has now risen to 600,000, a queue of 600,000 people waiting for driving tests. And again, the government, although we've aired this in the House recently by way of an oral question, the government is making no progress on this. Things are going backwards. It is not better than its predecessor. It is palpably and measurably worse. So I hope the noble Lord the Minister is able to address that point as well. This instrument in itself is not objectionable except for the introduction of the signal it sends to synthetic fuel manufacturers, but most importantly the introduction of that principle that driving licenses can be manipulated to achieve other government policies. But it's also an opportunity for the government to explain why it is that money is not being put in, on the other hand, to strengthening our roads to carry these heavy vehicles. Rather, the roads are breaking up. And also to explain what they are doing to make a driving licence a reality by allowing people access to driving tests. So I wish to move the amendment standing in my name.
The original question was that the regulations laid before the House on the 14th of March be approved, since when an amendment has been moved by Lord Moylan at the end to insert the words set out on the order paper. The question I therefore have to put is that this amendment to be agreed to.